It was the first rain in weeks, and it came soft as a whisper on the tin roof of the ranch house. Willa hadn't planned on cleaning the attic that day. She only went up there to find an old quilt for the baby. But as she pulled down the cedar chest from the back wall, a gust of wind slammed the window open, and the Bible that had belonged to her late father tumbled to the floor. It landed open on the floorboards, pages fluttering, and out fell a yellowed envelope. Willa hesitated. She recognized her father's handwriting instantly, tight, slanted, with a kind of urgency even in the loops of the letters. Her breath caught. He died 4 years ago in a riding accident no one talked about anymore. Not since the night her mother packed up her grief and left Willa the ranch with nothing but a hug and an apology. She picked up the envelope with shaking hands. No stamp. Just one name, written in pencil. Emmett. She sat there on the attic floor, dust in her hair, rain tapping overhead like a ticking clock, and read. It wasn't long, just a few lines, but each one hit like a bullet. Emmett, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I reckon I've failed you. I kept something from you that I shouldn't have. You have a right to know. You're not just a hand on this ranch. You're my son. And this land was always meant to be yours. Willa didn't move. Her mouth had gone dry. She read it again and again. She knew the name. Everyone on the ranch did. Emmett had worked there years ago. A wiry cowboy with storm cloud eyes who never said much, but who could calm a spooked horse with just a look. He left one night after her father's funeral, didn't even wait to be paid. Folks said he was heartbroken, but no one knew why. Now she did. He was her father's son, her brother. And if this letter was true, then everything she'd built, every fence post she'd dug, every dollar she'd poured into keeping the ranch alive, wasn't really hers. She sat by the fire that night, the letter in her lap, and the storm now rolling steady over the plains. The ranch house creaked like it was listening. She thought of Emmett, where he might be if he was even alive. Thought of how her father had said nothing, not to her, not in his will, not even on his deathbed. She reached for the Bible again, almost without thinking. It had always been her father's way of hiding things, not just in words, but in silence. Inside the back cover, tucked just behind the family register, she found something else, a photograph. 2 young men standing side by side, her father and Emmett, arms slung around each other like brothers, not boss in hand, and written in faded ink on the back, "My boys, forgive me." Willa didn't sleep that night. How could she? By morning the sky had cleared, but nothing else had. The cattle still needed tending. The fence line still sagged where the wind had bent it. Life on a ranch rolled on, steady and stubborn. But Willa was not the same, because now she had a choice to make. She could burn the letter and forget. No one else knew. No one ever would. Or she could try to find Emmett and risk losing everything. Willa rode into town 2 days later with dust in her boots and doubt twisting in her belly. She hadn't told anyone why she was going. Just left a note for old Martha to feed the chickens and keep an eye on the south pasture. The rest, the reason she was going, the reason she hadn't slept since reading that letter, stayed folded up inside her, just like the envelope she carried in her coat pocket. She went to the post office first, thinking maybe Emmett had left a forwarding address. He hadn't. Then the diner, where the regulars stared into their coffee mugs like they held secrets. No one had seen him. It was at the livery stable that she struck gold. The stableman, Jed, older than sin and twice as blunt, remembered Emmett, said he passed through 6 months ago, looking lean and half-starved, headed north with a busted saddle and eyes that didn't meet yours. Said he was heading toward Three Pines, a ghost town turned logging camp up by the ridge. Willa thanked him, tipped him more than she should have, and rode out that same evening with a satchel full of biscuits and fear sitting heavy in her throat. The trail to Three Pines was rough country. Steep switchbacks, narrow ledges, rock slides waiting to happen, but it gave her time to think. Time to ask herself things she wasn't sure she wanted answers to. What if Emmett hated her for showing up? What if he resented her for having what should have been his? What if he didn't even believe her? She slept that night beneath a lean-to of pine branches, fire crackling low, her father's Bible under her saddlebag like it still had something left to confess. In the morning, she kept riding. Three Pines barely earned the name. A few cabins, a blacksmith, a logging shack, and a saloon that looked like it leaned more out of habit than design. A mutt barked at her boots as she dismounted, and the smell of pine sap and sawdust hung in the air like perfume. She asked around. One man said he thought Emmett bunked with the loggers but hadn't seen him in days. Another shrugged. Quiet fella. Keeps to himself. Drinks when he's paid. Finally, a woman, apron-stained and sweeping the saloon steps, tilted her head and said, "You look like him, you know." Willa blinked. "Emmett?" The woman nodded. "He's up behind the ridge. Got a little shack up there. Built it hisself. He don't come down much these days." She found him just before sundown. His cabin was small but solid, tucked into the hillside like it grew there. Smoke curled from the chimney. A horse grazed nearby. Willa's heart hammered. She dismounted and walked up slow, every step louder than it should be. She paused at the door, raised her hand on and knocked. It opened halfway, and there he was, older than she remembered, beard shot with gray, eyes wary and weathered. For a second, he just looked at her, then soft as a wind through pine. "Willa?" She swallowed. "I found a letter. From my father." His jaw tightened. "He said," she faltered, pulled the envelope from her coat, "You're his son. He didn't take it, didn't move." "I didn't know," she whispered. "Not until 2 days ago." Still nothing. "I don't want anything from you," she added. "But I thought, if I were you, I'd want to know." He finally looked away. "I knew." The words landed like a slap. Willa stepped back. "I knew," he repeated, but he never said it outright. Just hints, looks. Treated me different when no one was around, like I mattered, but not enough to give me his name, not enough to tell anyone. Willa felt something crumple in her chest. "He was a good man," she said, though it sounded hollow now. Emmett laughed, bitter and small. Was he? They stood there, dusk gathering around them, the world going quiet. Then he opened the door wider. "Come in. I guess we got things to talk about." Inside, the cabin was sparse but warm. A fire snapped in the hearth. A Bible sat on the mantel, open and worn. Willa stared at it, then at him. "You still believe?" she asked. He followed her gaze. "Don't know, but I keep it. Some things are hard to throw away." She nodded, heart aching with things too tangled for words. And then, with a voice raw from miles and memory, she told him everything about the ranch, the letter, the photo in the back cover, how their father had written, "My boys." "Forgive me." Emmett didn't say much, but when she finished, he looked at her, really looked at her, like someone trying to remember a song they once loved but hadn't heard in years. "What are you going to do now?" he asked. Willa reached into her satchel and pulled out a deed. "I brought you a copy," she said, "to the ranch. You have a claim to it now, a real one." He stared at it, then whispered, "Why would you do that?" Her throat tightened. "Because I'm tired of carrying it all alone." The journey back to the ranch was quieter than the ride out, not because there was nothing to say, but because some things needed the silence first. Emmett rode beside Willa, hat pulled low, boots dusty again. He hadn't said yes, but he hadn't said no either. When she'd mounted up to leave, he'd saddled his own horse without a word. That was enough for her. Back at the ranch, the land looked different. Maybe it was the light. Maybe it was the knowing. Maybe it was because she wasn't looking at it as hers anymore. Not entirely. They arrived mid-afternoon. The chickens clucked as if nothing had changed. The wind rolled down from the hills like a whispered blessing. And Emmett stood there, just off the porch, staring out across the fields he never thought he'd see again. Willa showed him the barn, the tack room, the pasture fence that still needed mending. He didn't comment, just nodded now and then, absorbing it all. It wasn't until they stepped inside the house that something shifted. The living room still smelled like saddle soap and old wood. The Bible lay on the mantel again, closed this time, the letter now tucked away elsewhere. The photo, though, she'd framed it, put it beside the lamp where it could finally be seen. Their father, younger, with 2 children. One was her. The other, it had to be Emmett. He walked over to it, fingers twitching like they weren't sure whether to touch or recoil. "You remember when it was taken?" she asked softly. "No," he said, "but I always hoped I was in one." That night she made stew, simple fare, potatoes, beans, a sliver of salted beef. He ate it slow, as if remembering how. She caught him watching her a few times, like he couldn't quite believe she was real, or maybe just waiting for the other boot to drop. When the dishes were done, she poured 2 cups of coffee and they sat out on the porch. "You ever wanted land of your own?" she asked. He shook his head. "Didn't seem like it was in the cards." "It is now." He studied her. "You really mean to split it?" Willa looked out over the darkening fields. "I don't know what the law says, but I know what's right, and I'm not about to let shame and silence do the speaking for me." After a pause, he said, "I wouldn't take more than my share." She gave a tired smile. "I was hoping you'd say that." Over the next week, Emmett stayed. Not as a guest, not as a hired hand, just stayed. He fixed the pasture gate, mended a leak in the roof, mucked the stalls like he'd done it 1,000 times. He didn't talk much, but neither did she. There was a rhythm forming, and it held. It was Martha, old and sharp-eyed, who said what Willa hadn't dared to. "You trust him," she said, kneading dough at the kitchen counter one morning. "Like you've known him forever." Willa nodded. "Feels that way." "He reminds me of your father," Martha added. "Not in the face, in the silence." The biggest test came with the storm. Thunder cracked the sky open one night, and lightning lit the fields like fire. A tree split near the barn, spooked the horses, sent one crashing through a fence. Willa was out the door in seconds, coat barely on, boots half-laced. She expected Emmett to be right behind her. He wasn't. He was already out there, already calming the gelding, already fixing the fence, already there. When it was over, they stood drenched, rain dripping from their hats, shoulders heaving. She looked at him and saw the truth plain as day. "You belong here," she whispered. He blinked, not just because of a letter, not just because of blood, because of who you are. He lowered his gaze, then lifted it again. "Then let me stay." Spring brought color back to the land, green shoots pushing up from thawed earth, birds returning with stubborn joy. Together, they planted corn in the south field, fixed the porch steps, painted the barn door a shade of red that caught the sunrise just right. And slowly, gently, something new took root between them. Not romance, not yet. Something deeper, a knowing. Two people bound not by history, but by decision to share what had been hidden too long. One morning, Willa reached for the Bible on the mantel, opened it to the page where the letter had once been. Instead, she tucked something new inside, a photo of the ranch, freshly taken. A note that read, "This land grew stronger when we did. Let it always remind us what forgiveness can plant." She left it there quietly. Some things don't need to be spoken to be sacred. And out beyond the porch, Emmett stood in the sunlight, sleeves rolled, eyes soft. Not a stranger anymore, not a secret, just family.